So I had everybody in front of me through this little rift in some of the remnants of this 2000 plus year old temple. And I said, "Hey guys, I'm really sorry. It's rainy. It's kind of gray, but let me see if I can call on my friend Apollo to help us out." So I said, it's kind of like the Power Rangers, in the old days, by the power of Apollo, let the sun shine. And I said, ha ha ha. And about 3 or 4 seconds passed, and everybody's laughing. And then all of a sudden, a ray shoots out of the clouds right between us. The sun stops, and everybody is looking at me like I just did something. And I said, I did not do that. I have no idea how that happened. But since that day, Bill, I have never asked Apollo for anything else. Never.
Welcome to the Where Have You Been podcast. I'm your host, Bill Ream, and each week on the pod, I have conversations with incredible guests from all walks of life. Expect to hear funny, crazy, emotional, life-changing, and even sometimes life-threatening stories and experiences that will entertain and inspire you. As always, I appreciate your likes, subscriptions, ratings, and reviews wherever you are listening. It doesn't sound like much, but it truly helps the pod get to the ears of more people who may enjoy it. And check out the website, whybpodcast.com, for links to the socials where you can find pictures from the guests and their stories, and also buy merch if you're so inclined. Now let's get to this week's episode. Thank you for being here. And welcome back into another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast. As always, I'm your host, Bill Ream. And as always, I have an extraordinary guest. I don't always say extraordinary, actually. So this is a first in a while to have such an extraordinary person on the podcast today. So I have Joseph on the show today. Welcome, Joseph.
Thank you very much, Bill. It is a great pleasure to be here. And I'm very happy to be here as well because I love your podcast. So thanks so much for having me on.
Of course. Thank you for saying that, and thank you for being here. Joseph is a U.S. Navy veteran, and I'm going to self-proclaim you as, which I think you'll agree, an Italy historian and guide, and probably, I'm not even going to say probably, the biggest expert of Italy's history that we've ever had on the show. So if you would be so kind, Joseph, as to tell our listeners, who are you?
Okay. Thanks. Yes, I am a historian of Italy. My specialty is probably ancient Italy up until the Middle Ages. I have been a tour guide for many years, but what I do is I get people to go to Italy and I show them another side of Italy that they normally wouldn't see otherwise. And so I really make Italy transformational in people's lives. So it's more than just, call it a tour gig, right? It's more than just a tour gig. It's, for me, it's a way of life and it's a passion.
And let me ask you, what caused this for you? How did this happen that you became so infatuated with the history of Italy?
Well, it didn't happen on purpose in the sense that I had a divine plan or an overarching, plan that I was going to execute. It all started when I joined the US Navy. And the US Navy said that they were going to send me over to Italy. And I said, I'm originally from Georgia, outside of Atlanta, had never left the country at that point. I was a teenager. And I said, okay, so Italy it is. I sure hope it's nice. And I got there, and within 24 hours, I kind of knew that's where I was supposed to be. And I do know that that sounds strange, but I knew that that's where I was supposed to be. The food was something that I had never had before. The conversations were different. And so I stayed in Italy because that's where I was stationed for a couple years. But it led me to one day in particular, and that is the day that I said, Italy is for me. I'm going to be a historian. This is what I'm going to do. It's that I had been hearing for a while about, people would whisper it, people would say it in conspiratorial tones, that there's this sunken city just north of Naples along the coast. And I would say, well, tell me about it. And this was before the internet. There weren't books on this, etc. Some people would just say, well, it's a archaeological manual, talks about what it could be, etc. But me being young, and I said, you know what, that sounds kind of like a good adventure. So I hired a boat, and I had the fisherman, whose boat it was, take me out into the Gulf. It was a spring day, so it was kind of cold there. The water was cold, cloudy, and I was thinking, Bill, I should probably, just turn around and not do this because this doesn't look very profitable. In fact, it looks kind of murky. And the fisherman himself said, I wouldn't jump in there. But then a ray of sun burst through the clouds into the sea, and lo and behold, I saw walls beneath the boat. And at that point, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to jump in. And the fisherman, I can remember he's saying "fa freddo," which means it's cold. Don't do it, And so did it anyway. And after I got used to the water, I started, swimming around walls. Then I started to go to the bottom of about 10 to 12 feet deep, and I moved the silt. And guess what I found? But an actual Roman mosaic floor. And that to me was just like a big shock. And for those of you who may not know what a mosaic floor is, it's basically a picture made of different color stones that are put together. And so when I saw this, and I was very lucky because there was just enough sun that was coming through the water, I was in heaven. I swam around another 10, 15 minutes, and then I went up and I got back on the boat where I didn't even know what to say, so, I just drank some of the fisherman's wine, cheese, bread, and olives, and I thought, "You know what? I really love this. I like this more than anything else that I have ever done, and I love Italy." And everything started from that day, and that was around 1990. And since then, of course, I've gone on to discover other things and do many other things, but that kind of origin story, though, has always stuck with me because today that is an actual tourism hub. People come from all around the world to see the sunken city, but I was the first one, first non-archaeologist type to get in there, to find it, and then to open it up for tourism. I ran the first tours there for several years. But today, that Roman ruin, that sunken city, it benefits a lot of families. So I'm very happy not only about my own discovery, but I'm very happy about what it means for the families in those regions to be able, to put food on their table.
Did the gentleman with the boat actually know exactly where to take you, or was it sort of a hey, this is a general area, this is where it's supposed to be, and then you just kind of found it?
He knew that there was something there. He just didn't know what it was. And the interesting thing is that he wasn't right, but he had heard a story that that was the exact place where the Emperor Nero tried to kill his mother. And if you know anything about the Emperor Nero, he had a lot of problems with his mother because his mother helped put him on the throne, but then she kind of wanted the throne for herself. And I found out only later he really didn't try and kill her there. That was actually a couple hundred yards down the coast where he tried to kill her. But
Wow.
but but it was an amazing story because the fisherman just said, "Well, that's what my father told me, and that's what his father told him." So you've got all of these old stories from 2,000 years ago that were just kind of percolating through the generations, to the people of today. Today, of course, we have, the internet. We can, you know, the information flies around, but back then, people were the main source of information. And to a certain degree today, especially in Italy, they kind of still are sometimes.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you've actually been on news media outlets and things because of this discovery, right?
Yes, I was actually able to go on TV to talk about it. I and that led to other things because I became a specialist historian, not only in ancient but medieval Italy, and so that led to me being a consultant for production companies whose work showed up on the BBC, the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, and so that really led to life's beginnings, and it led me to be where I am today.
Really fantastic. And so now today you host I don't want to say excursions, I want to say I guess tours,
Mhm.
but so your through your curiosity and research just kind of became a thing where you said like, "Hey, I have to share this with more people. More people are going to be interested in this like I am." Is that
Yes,
kind of how
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Over Over a career, of doing thousands of tours, I've been in over 3,000 tours, let's say. So I've done a lot of the mundane things. And where the curiosity and the passion comes in is that when people think about going to Italy, it's almost like, especially today, they're promised this adventure, this real Italy, this genuine Italy, but inevitably, most people will do the exact same thing that most other people are doing. I'm not sure if that's by design, but it just kind of happens that way. Whether you're going to Rome, to Florence, to Venice, or you're going to the same places along the Amalfi Coast, but it's always the same. But where I've kind of honed my craft is I do the things, the big things in the big cities that you need to see, of course. But I've always found that the real Italy is usually beyond the big cities, and it's usually meeting people where they are. Like, you can't on one of our tours, we go over the sunken city of Porto Julius, the one that I, helped discover back in 1990 for tourism. But you can't do that if you stay in the main centers. There's even places that were so far off the beaten path 25, 30 years ago, but that must be visited today because they're starting to be discovered. Like, there's a place in Calabria, the Grotta di Romito. And there, back in the day, so to speak, there were no signs, there was no anything. It was just some friends and myself prancing around some caves because we had heard from some friends of a friend's that there was a big painting of a bull there that was very, very old. So we found this place, and we asked a local, to tell us more about it. And what we saw was a 20,000-year-old painting of a bull and a couple, their skeletons, 11,000 years old, hugging into eternity.
Oh my God.
And these are the types of experiences that I say, yes, see the big things. And on our tours, we see a lot of those big things, but we see these special things, these things that you will carry with you for the rest of your life, because that's not something that most people see or most people do, right? And so we always kind of, I think we could say, have a balance on the tours between the big, the bold, and the things you need to see. And so
Boy. Yeah.
so that's the
Incredible.
balance. That's the
Yeah,
balance.
that's so awesome. Now, your tours, do they typically, are they multiple days? They
Well,
have to be, right?
yeah, we do a couple of things. We have a small group tours, minimum of 8 people. Sometimes we can go up to 15, but honestly, I would say our average is about 10 people because where we go, you can't take big buses. You can't even take medium-sized buses. So we tend to go in small groups, and part of it, I guess, formatted because we have to see things together and we have to show things together because some of these places are very much based upon relationships. And because we know the people, we know the key holders, they're the ones who let our small groups go in. So we have these types of experiences, but we also do tailor made because sometimes people have something else in mind or they want to stay more or do more. And so we create programs designed around them, but always trying to keep that balance for them, helping them see and do other things that are a little off the beaten path.
Really cool. And so, where can people find the business, the tour business? And do you have any socials as well? I like to kind of do that early just in case people don't make it all the way to the end.
Sure. I think the easiest place to find is where we do the storytelling, which is ItalianHistoryWithJoseph.com. ItalianHistoryWithJoseph.com. But at the end of the podcast, we're going to give away something free. Actually, a few things for free. So I would invite people to check that out because that's going to be at ItalianHistoryWithJoseph.com/stories. And there you're going to be able to get access to the tours and to other things, but you'll also have access to our socials, which is Italian History with Joseph. And we're on primarily Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, Italian History with Joseph. And every week we're doing one or two stories about something new and fun. And just did a story that the other day, Bill, on Frederick II's Castel del Monte in the Puglia region. That some people said that it was built to house the Holy Grail because of its use of the divine number eight. So we get to talk about how the square is representative of the earth and the circle is of heaven. If you put the circle in the square, it forms an octagon. And so Frederick II saw himself as a conduit between earth and heaven, and that is reflected in the math of Castle del Monte. Now, was it actually meant to house the Holy Grail? Probably not, but it is a good story. And in Italy, we always like to mention the story before we tell what may be more of a probable history. And so,
Yeah, I was just say I love that stuff. Like the kind of like the symbolism and the even the like the religious aspect of, what was somebody thinking when they built this magnificent, beautiful, grandiose, or maybe it's not even that, but when they built this beautiful place, whether it's a temple or a cathedral or whatever it is, it's just everything I feel like back then, thousands of years ago, had more purpose than just this is where people are going to come to pray or whatever.
yeah,
And the symbolism and everything. It's very, very fascinating to me.
you're absolutely right. Like you could take just Castle del Monte, and everything about it is based upon the golden ratio, right? The 358s. Everything about it is that. And you could say, well, why was this so important? Well, because we had just come out of the dark ages, so to speak, and people were rediscovering classical philosophy and math and architecture and styles. And this is the exact same period that a mathematician, Fibonacci from Pisa, he created that golden ratio, or he rediscovered that golden ratio. And that ratio is actually applied mathematically in the construction of that castle. And it's at this exact moment under Frederick II that we move from Roman numerals to Arabic numerals. So there was a lot going on around the castle. So you go to the castle, it's mysterious, it's mystical, it's grandiose, it's beautiful. But if you know a little bit more about it, about who was behind it, not just the mathematician, but the emperor itself, then I think you get very excited because I never look, Bill, at places and monuments as um, a date. Sometimes a name and a date. I always look at the actual person that was behind it. And if you take somebody like Frederick II, whose castle this was, he was the Holy Roman Emperor, but he was also the King of Sicily. And Puglia was in his domain of the King of Sicily. He spoke six languages. He wrote the seminal work on falconry that was used until the 1900s. He was very much into the use of mathematics. He brought back Roman architecture. He was the Renaissance man 2 centuries before the Renaissance. And at his court, it was amazing. He had Latins, Arabs, Jews, and many other peoples from the known world right there at his court, everybody giving their knowledge of the world all together, for the glorification of his court. And he was a little, he was a little out there too. He actually had a zoo near this castle as well, with many exotic animals from Europe and Africa and in the Middle East. So you get all of that from just visiting a site like Castle del Monte, which may not be first on your list, but after you go there on one of our programs, Bill, it all makes sense. And then when we're having a wonderful pasta and maybe a burrata cheese and some nice vino, some wine in the evening, then the circle is complete on that day. And so,
Oh man, it's really awesome. I might just have to pop into one of these days. I'll have to keep tabs on when you're doing what. So, and are there
yeah.
multiple different? Like, obviously, you said there's different tours, but like, I guess what I mean to ask is, and I assume the answer is yes. But you go to places all over the country of Italy.
Yes, our Buried Italy series, there's four, which is Rome South, but we go to places all over Italy. We also have them in the center of Italy where we're visiting Etruscan tombs and that sort of thing. And we also have some that are in the very north of the country that are based around the Dolomites in Venice. And so but we're able to do anything in Italy proper or Sicily. And that's that may need a little bit of explanation because you say, but isn't Sicily Italy? And the answer is yes, no, and
I'm easily confused, Joseph.
yeah, and that's because Sicily is Sicily. It has been its own kingdom from time to time. It has its own history, which at many times is the same as southern Italy, rarely the same as northern Italy, but sometimes it's its own private Idaho. It has its own story, its own food, its dialect, its language is different from anywhere else in what we could call continental Italy. And so that we do a tour only going around Sicily, but you learn in Sicily, you learn about the Mycenaeans, the Greeks, the Phoenicians, who became the Carthaginians later on. You learn about the Romans, and then you learn about the fall of Rome and the Byzantine Empire, which was the Greek part of Eastern Roman Empire. Then you learn about the Arabs, which we would not have Sicily without the Arabs. And then you learn about the Norman conquest and how they started to put all these people together. And then you have French occupation, Spanish, and it just goes on and on. The history in Sicily is unique and it's unlike anywhere else. But there are other places in Italy that have similar histories too. They're just different. And that's what I think makes, for me anyway, Italy so wonderful because you travel 20 or 30 miles and you have a different dialects sometimes. You have a different pasta, you have a different wine, you have a different cheese. It's almost like 100 different countries in one.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And just having been to Italy twice, and we talked before, and I've been to a few different places. There's still so much more that I want to see, and I haven't even tackled, really understanding the history of some of these things as well. And I do want to
Mhm,
get to your travel stories and experiences. Not that these aren't in their own way, but I
mhm.
do have one more question before we kind of move to the bulk of the show,
Sure.
which just my own curiosity, like, are you still constantly learning more and more, just whether it's for your own just need to feel satiated with the history of Italy? Like, are you still studying things? And then as you do that, do you feel compelled to maybe add a different tour to your, selections that you have?
Absolutely. I am always learning something on Italy, and there's a couple reasons for that. Is that for one, I don't think any one person can ever know everything about Italy. It's just too in depth, too deep, too much history, you could say. There's too many great people there, too many movements of peoples, but I have a good handle on a lot of stuff, let's say. But it's so easy for me to go down the road and find out something new. And so for me to know what I know, I have relationships with hundreds of people because each one of them knows what they know and they probably know a lot more than I know about their own particular corner of Italy. So I try and accumulate that as much as I can to tell the story accurately. But I'm always finding, to my chagrin, there's just a lot more to know. And then there's other things too. History changes. And you say, what? Yes, history changes. And that says some of the stories when I started from the 1990s were inaccurate. They were stories, they were more myths, and they weren't always history. Now, I'd say 95% of what I said in the 90s was correct, but some things have changed. Like if you ever go to Rome and you go to the mouth of truth, the Bocca della Verità. In front of there, everyone used to call that the Temple of the Vestal Virgins. Although I had heard it probably had something to do with Hercules or something like that, but we didn't really know for sure. And then we find out in the early 2000s, yes, that's more to do with Hercules. It had really nothing to do with the Vestal Virgins ever. So you're always learning new things as well. Now, if you take, for example, remember because the Odyssey, just came out with Odysseus, and a lot of people are thinking about these Mycenaeans selling all over the place. Just in the last couple of decades, they have actually found how active the Mycenaeans were in Italy, where before we did not know as much. And so the history and the stories have been totally enhanced over this time. Now we know that they were very active in this island near Naples called Vivara. They were very active in this place called Lipari, which is an island north of Sicily. We now know the exact place in Sicily where we believe the legend started of the Cyclops, throwing rocks at the crew. But so yeah, Bill, it's always changing. And so we have to always keep on top of it to make sure that we are passing down not only a good story, but the best and most correct story.
Absolutely fascinating. I feel like I should be paying you. You realize I'm not paying you, right? For the
Yeah,
time.
no, that's okay. We can drink a bottle of wine together sometime. That would be
There we go. That'll be great. I'll buy one on your suggestion. How's that?
perfect.
So let's do this. Because obviously you've explored most, maybe, or almost most of Italy, but you've been other places too. So let's
Hmm.
just kick off with some really cool experiences and stories. Joseph Walker, where have you been?
Well, outside of Italy, I've actually been all over Europe, even penetrating Eastern Europe a little bit. I've been into the Middle East. I've been into North Africa and places like Egypt. But some of the places that I've been as well would be South America. I actually lived in Brazil for almost 8 years. And Brazil, it represents, I think, just over half of South America, but it's continental in size. And even though I loved visiting Paraguay and Argentina and Chile, etc., Brazil kind of has my heart in South America for a variety of reasons. And then I've also been to Oceania, spent a lot of time in Australia and New Zealand. And then I've traced around China and Japan, Canada, swinging back. So I think I'm at 6 continents and 40 countries right now. I still have to go
It's
to Antarctic, but yeah, maybe 45 countries right now I've been to.
absolutely incredible, and I'm blown away. I don't know how you've had the time to visit all of the rest of the most of the rest of the world.
Hmm.
Not most of. I mean, I guess there's a lot more countries, but
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying. When you've spent so much time in Italy as well, how often, how much of the year are you in Italy on average?
In Italy, on average, lately, I have been 3 or 4 months on average. But of course, I lived there for 17 years straight. But 3 or 4 months. But soon I'll probably have to flip that. And and that's kind of my odyssey. But I am very soon, I am going back and I'm going to be living full time in Italy, but coming back to the US. So I'm going to flip it and come back to the US every 3 or 4 months, but just stay in Italy because I'm there all the time anyway. Like some people, they may, drive their car or take a bus somewhere, etc. For me, for several years, it's been just taking the airplane all the time, going over, coming back, going back over. So I might as well just stay. And plus, I have two wonderful daughters who live in Italy. They are both Italian citizens. So it's just making more and more sense for me professionally and for familial reasons to stay more in Italy.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And obviously, I know that you're going to have a lot of stories and experiences you can share with us from being in Italy. Can we start in Brazil? I'm fascinated and
Hmm.
kind of curious to know if maybe something specific happened that while you were there that kind of made you fall in love with it. I'm sure there was something, but
Yes. Well, I had passed through a turbulent moment with my first spouse, and that's it. It happens to the best of us, I think, sometimes. And so I went to Brazil because a friend said, "Hey, you've never been to Rio de Janeiro. You have to go there. I know you like history and culture, but it's got more than you think." And I said, "Yeah, but I'm really a culture guy." They said, just trust me, just go down. And it actually did have a lot, Rio de Janeiro did have a lot of history and culture, especially the Portuguese Empire was ran out of Rio de Janeiro for many years at the time that Napoleon swept in and he took over Portugal. So that kind of hooked me there. And I started to discover more, including about the initial colonization. And then I started to learn about just, I guess you could say, the natural wonders of the country from the Amazon all the way to the extreme south. And when you put into the mix all of the nature and the history and the culture that is in Brazil, I met my wife in Ipanema. And so I sometimes joke, I call her the girl from Ipanema.
The girl from, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so we've been together for over 20 years and have a lovely son who's 13 years old. And so we lived several years in Brazil. And I speak Portuguese. Of course, I speak Italian. I even speak some Neapolitan dialect in Italy, but I speak Portuguese as well because of that wonderful experience. But I worked in tourism, Bill, in Brazil. And so what this means is that I was working as a receptive tour operator for some years. And that was interesting because it was so different from my Italy experience. And I love Italy so much that at first I thought I would not like a small break, right? But although it was never too much of a break because I was always going back to Italy. But in Brazil, being part of a receptive tour operator, I would host people from around the world going into the Amazon forest, or we would go into the great swamps of the Pantanal, or we would visit the old missions of the Jesuits from 300 plus years ago in the very south of the country. And so Brazil has so much nature that I think most people don't realize that it is one of the most beautiful countries in the world.
Really awesome. Well, kick us off with any like story or experience specifically that you had. It doesn't have to be in Brazil. And I'm going to probably really make this painful for you because I'm going to steer
Mhm.
you away from Italy for now. But don't worry, we'll bring it back. But yeah, anywhere in the world that you just, if we sat down at the bar and we were having a glass of wine and we total strangers just realized that we both were really passionate about seeing the world and travel and learning about cultures. And what are like one of those couple stories that we would swap over a glass of wine about somewhere that you've been in the world?
Well, I could do a couple, and one would be the Iguazu Falls, the Foz de Iguaçu in Portuguese. And that is in kind of the southwestern part of Brazil, and it's where Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil meet together. And this is a waterfall that's about 10 times larger than Niagara. And you get to walk across these boards overneath the water, and you just feel like an ant in the middle of a huge water park. But it doesn't stop there because there are so many waterfalls making up this waterfall, because there's low waterfalls, mid-level waterfalls, high waterfalls, because there's so many waterfalls that there are rainbows that are shooting everywhere. And in the middle of this, you have more birds than I have ever seen anywhere else in my life, including several different types of parrots and the toucan. That's where I got to see the toucan in the wild. And so this is a place where if you're looking for a greater power, you're going to feel something if you go to Iguazu Falls. That's just simple like that. And another quick story like that one is that, but I'm going to go very far away now to Australia. We would go down to Tasmania, which is in the very southern part of Australia itself. Everyone's heard of Tasmania through the Tasmanian Devil, right? And you can go visit, the Tazes that are there, and that's wonderful fun. But what got me is we got to take a speedboat past what's known as Bruny Island, which is in the southern part of Tasmania. So Tasmania is in the south of Australia, and Brunei's in the south of Tasmania. The only thing that's after Brunei is the Antarctic. If you just kept going down. But you have just a kaleidoscope of colors that's there. But what really got me is that I remember we were racing by these monoliths, huge monoliths, hundreds of feet tall, and they're all very, very thin. It's like a never-ending cliff. And I discovered that These are the violent traces of when the continents were pulling apart, because that used to be part of Gondwanaland when everything was together and they pulled apart, and you actually get to see the violent separation right there. And I don't remember the exact, millions of years, but I think it was about 170 or so million years ago. And you see all of that violence, natural violence, right there in those monoliths. But at the base of these cliffs, you see seals and penguins and all different types of birds. And we saw that day, we saw a whale, and we saw maybe 6 or 7 dolphins, a pod of dolphins. And it was just an amazing, amazing experience.
It's
So,
very surreal. It seems, and you like I could just almost feel how breathtaking those waterfalls had to be with the idea of all the rainbows and the birds.
mhm,
Very, very cool. Something I think I probably need to see
yes,
someday.
yes,
So
that has to be on the bucket list for sure.
really cool. Well, I'm going to let you kind of take the reins here for now because you know your best stories and experiences that you've had in the world. And if they end up being mostly in Italy, I'm absolutely down with it. So, where would you like to take us next?
Yeah, we can do Italy a bit, only because I'm mentally prepared for Italy, but I've got stories,
I had a feeling you would.
but I've got interesting stories in Ireland. I've got where
Well,
where where I ended up,
well I was going to say, let's go there and then we can
sure,
circle back.
sure. Well, I always wanted to find the end of the rainbow, right? And and I did. And so,
I'm
but
sorry, what?
yes. Because in Ireland, I've done several tours in Ireland too, and I've been was guiding people around in Ireland. And there, we would talk about the successive waves of the Celts, but the pre-Celtic people, the Tuatha De Danann, the magical people, the fir bogs, the older ancient race that was there. We used to do all of this, but the thing that got people, I think, most excited is the rainbows. And, we would have to set up a rainbow alert. You know, during the day, we would be racing from one castle, one cliff, one beautiful scene to another. A rainbow would almost always pop up. One day we counted 13 rainbows in one day. But on one trip, I decided that I had to find the end of the rainbow. And so I kept looking, and it would just kind of fade out into the ground. I couldn't really find it, except I was kind of there, right? I kind of found it, but I didn't really find it until one day we were just south of a place called Killarney at Torque Waterfalls. And this massive rainbow, it came bending and winding its way down into the waterfalls themselves. And I said, I've got to get to the end. When I got there, I did not find a leprechaun. I did not find a pot of gold, which was very, very unfortunate, because in those days I was thinking maybe if I find that pot of gold, I could maybe buy a castle here in Ireland and just call it a day, right? But I didn't find any of that. But this rainbow ended into the water droplets that were being shot out of this waterfall, creating this massive kaleidoscope in front of me. Imagine a sheer wall of shimmering rainbow colors. And I have never seen that before, and I have never seen that since. But on that day, I saw at least half of a waterfall turn into a rainbow. And that for me was the end of the rainbow, and one of the most beautiful sights I've ever seen on the planet.
I didn't honestly like. I don't understand the science of. I understand the science of rainbows in that it's the light reflecting from the mist or the water. I get that part of it, but like, I guess I never really imagined that you really could reach the end of it. I always kind of felt like maybe it kind of moves with you, and so you're never
Mhm.
really at the start or the end. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, that's one of the few times I've actually ever found the end of the rainbow. But I have found in Ireland the end a couple times, but it was just kind of ending up, in the middle of a cow field, and you know what's in cow fields, Bill. And so
It's not as pleasant as a pot of gold, that's for sure.
and everybody says, "Let's race across there." And I said, "No, because I won't. I can't let you back in the vehicle if you're going to go racing around cow patties. And
Oh my gosh. Hilarious.
so, so yeah, I mean, that's one of my stories there in Ireland. But speaking of the play of of light and of imagination, there was one time that I got humbled, and this will bring us back to Italy. Actually, I got humbled because I was daring the gods. You say, what do you mean daring the gods? Whoa, that sounds kind of mysterious. But what happened was is that I had a small group, and we were in a place called Kuma, which is the oldest Greek colony in the West. And we were on top of the temple of Apollo. Apollo, mind you, is the sun god, but that was put there because Daedalus landed after he lost his son, which I know everybody's going to know who his son is, Icarus. Icarus flew too high and, the
Mhm.
wax swept and he died because he was arrogant, right? And so his father was heartbroken, but he landed on this mount in what would be called Kuma, and they put a temple dedicated to Apollo, which was there to say, we understand you are you're Apollo and we're not. So one day it was gray and kind of rainy, and I was being a little cheeky because I had guided groups there several times before, and I like a good story too. And so I had everybody in front of me through this little rift in some of the remnants of this 2,000-plus-year-old temple, and I said, "Hey guys, I'm really sorry. It's rainy. It's kind of gray." But let me see if I can call on my friend Apollo to help us out. So I said, it's kind of like the Power Rangers, in the old days, by the power of Apollo, let the sun shine. And I said, ha ha ha. And about 3 or 4 seconds passed, and everybody's laughing, and then all of a sudden, a ray shoots out of the clouds right between us. The sun stops, and everybody is looking at me like I just did something. And I said, I did not do that. I have no idea how that happened. But since that day, Bill, I have never asked Apollo for anything else. Never.
That's absolutely incredible. What are the odds?
I am sure that it is a coincidence, but it was a little uncomfortable at that moment. Obviously, the clouds or somebody had a very good sense of humor.
Oh my gosh. That's when you just say thank you, thank you, thank you,
Yes,
thank you for doing that.
and
Have,
be
have a good-
humble. Yep, and be humble. And I said, now we're going to get off the temple. We're going to go somewhere else.
at least it wasn't like a bolt of lightning or something like that. That would have been.
Well, you're absolutely right. What would have happened if I would have called a bolt of lightning? I mean, I can only imagine at this point. But
Oh gosh. We should test your powers one of these days, though, just to see.
that would scare me too much. But yeah. So that was a very good story. But sometimes I would say it's about connections and the connections that you can make with the land, with the people, with the things that are around you. And nearby there, I had another wonderful experience, and this really this really captures the part of the connection and the relationship. Near there, near Kuma, people don't know, but there is the oldest Roman amphitheater that was ever built. They usually give the credit to Pompeii, which was built almost a century later because it was a full, complete amphitheater. Well, this one near Kuma was still partially hollowed out of a hill, but it was the first real attempt at an amphitheater. And again, I had heard from a friend that this thing existed. It was really neat, and I said, but I can't find it on my Naples or my Italy tour guidebook. It doesn't say that, but I found the place behind some gates, and I went in there and I started talking to the people, and I slowly started to get their confidence, let's say. They were living inside of this amphitheater and growing citrus fruits and grapes inside of where gladiators used to fight. And so After a couple years, they finally allowed me to participate in one of the harvests where I got to squeeze with my feet. You're not supposed to do this anymore, by the way, but I got to squeeze with my feet those grapes to make the grapes to go to fermentation to make the wine. And then they actually asked me to sit down and have a harvest meal with them. And I did that a couple of times. And I kept thinking, this place where gladiators fought 2,150 years ago, I am here, having a simple meal of things that were actually grown inside of this amphitheater. That is connection and relationship that I would say is next level almost. And to this day, when we're taking some of our tour guest, I always ask, I say, it's not on the official schedule, but would you like to see the amphitheater where they grow citrus and grapes? And if everybody says yes, we deviate 10, 15 minutes and we go there. And on some days, the family will come out and then they will demand that I take some of their tomatoes because they have wonderful, wonderful tomatoes. And they want me to take some of their tomatoes because they know that their tomatoes make the best caprese salad, which is mozzarella and tomato salad.
Mhm. Mhm.
So everybody loves that one.
Are you? I have a feeling that I know the answer to this, but when you travel, even if it's not like I'm just really traveling just to just experience a place, you're of the mindset probably because you're such a curious individual that I have a feeling you do this, but you make it a point to talk to strangers and locals, I assume,
Yes, yes.
even if it's not for any like grander reason than just for yourself.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. I think growth and curiosity are always at the base of what I do. I'm also very fearful of a mundane life, but I also want to know what makes those people tick. And what I mean by that is to observe them a little bit, not in a stalkerish type of way, but to try and meet them and to understand them. Because the more I understand other people and the depth of their culture and how they think and what they think, that enriches my life and it does affect how I think. And I've learned through these relationships over the decades really the difference between right and wrong and how to get through tough times and how to be humble through good times. And I learned it all through these conversations with with locals. And I think that Italy has given me the most stories of anywhere else, but it's a place that there's always another story that's just down the road. There's always another family to meet, and some of the best meals I've ever had were behind a gate that I had to make a relationship with a family.
Yeah. Do you remember? I'm putting you on the spot here, but can you share with us any like maybe one of the most impactful conversations you've just had with someone locally anywhere, but probably Italy?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's probably a couple, but I remember there was an elderly gentleman, and this has been about 20 years now. This is already in the 2000s, but he was talking to me about stoicism. And you said, well, stoicism, uh, that's kind of weird. And I said, well, it gets weirder because I would usually see him drinking a cafe at the corner bar, you know and so there's the tinkering of the cups, there's the smell of the cornetto, which is their version of the croissant, and in the cafe. And we used to just sit there and talk, and he really taught me about, and he said at the time, figlio, which means son. He says, son, we have 3,000 years of history. We've seen a lot of things go right and a lot of things go wrong. We've ruled the world. We've been ruled by the world. And he brought me into this idea of stoicism, which is it's a calm acceptance to do what you can do, but it's to always try and do what you can do and to always do the right thing. And that always, I didn't realize the depth of what he was saying at the time, but it did make me go read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. He was a Roman emperor. And then I got it. he says, you can control yourself. You can control your thoughts. Be humble, in victory and learn from your defeats. Bad times will pass because they will always pass. Ride them out. So that was for me a set of impactful conversations that I had with one gentleman in a bar over cafe over several months.
Wow. Really, I mean, yeah, really. I don't. Do I want to say profound? I mean, it just makes sense. But that's
Yes.
awesome.
And the
That's
cafe at the bar was good too, Bill. Just
side note.
just to throw
I
it out
think
there.
isn't everything good in Italy? But
Yes.
I guess it's not, because I'm sure that there are places, and I know that there are places that are not that great. I think you and I even discussed that the first time I ever went to Italy when I was in Rome, it was in August, and the families were all on holiday, and so really all we had was kind of like the local, like, quote unquote chain type places, and
Yes.
I was very disappointed by the food in Rome the first time that I went, and and actually only time I've been to Rome, but I can absolutely say without a shadow of a doubt that I've had the best meals and cafes and such since I've been back.
Yes.
Not in August. Learn my
Not in,
lesson.
not in August. And the rule is simple when you're eating in Rome. Look and see who is eating. And if it's people like us, Americans, then don't go in there. And that's not to say that we're bad, because we're not bad, but it's just to say that it's most likely than not, it's a touristy food place. And everyone has to make a living. But a lot of us, when we're going to visit a place like Rome, we want a meal that is more joyous, that's more memorable, and it's very easy to get in Rome. Rome can sometimes get a black eye because it's so busy and chaotic at times, and you can have a bad meal there. But just make sure always that there are some Italians that are eating in there, and then you have a good shot at that being a good meal. But when I take some of our clients or I am counseling them on whether they should go, I usually do some neat places. Like I ask them to go to one of my favorite restaurants, Pancrazio 1922, which is Pancrazio 1922. And they said, well, what's so special about this place? Is the food good? I said, well, the food is divine, of course, but it's because you have to go down. You enter the building, which is new. It's a 500-year-old building, but by Roman standards, it's kind of new, right? But
Mhm.
then you go down the steps and down the steps, and then all of a sudden, you're on the floor of what used to be Pompey's Theater. And you say, Pompey, maybe I've heard the name Pompey. Pompey's Theater. It was one of the first permanent structures, entertainment structures that the Romans ever built, the first century BC. But its most famous event that happened right there is that's where Julius Caesar was assassinated inside of
Oh
that
my
theater.
God.
So you're not eating exactly where he was assassinated, but you're eating in a part of the same theater of where he was assassinated, 50 yards down, so to speak. And so you've got this intense history all around you with with fresco paintings on either side, with a Roman column, with wine and olive oil faces, and you're having a wonderful, wonderful meal. And so that to me is the type of Rome I think that is worthy of seeking, especially if you haven't been to Rome many times. That's that's the time of Rome because it has the entertainment value, but the food is divine.
Yeah, and this is one thing I'll say, and we've touched on this on other episodes as well, and something that my ex and I were sort of against for a lot of the first maybe half of our travels that we did was we kind of wanted to do everything on our own, find what we could find and do our own research and whatever. And the one thing I learned after the very first time that we did follow a tour, it's invaluable. It's if you find a good
Mhm.
tour, and I could reference yours, I'm sure, but I guess just in my own experiences, I don't think I've had a bad one. And I've learned
Mhm.
so much more than I can even get from doing a Google search or, reading a book or any of that stuff. Because, like you said, like you make the connections with locals and you find out more history and more of the interesting facts than than most would, and so
Mhm.
it's really, really, really enriching. I think to do, even if it's just like a 3 hour walking tour of a place. I say absolutely do it.
Yeah, and I really thank you for that because it really is the difference of whether you come back having understood the place and hopefully having been transformed of whether you come back and say, "Yeah, that was pretty cool," you know, which is okay, but the way that we try and create our programs is that you do have that structured time, but you also have some downtime on your own. And
Mhm.
that's so you can go make some of those personal discoveries, which are also a lot of fun to make. And you can go make your own relationships with people. So I always think it's got to be a mix. I'm really against those types of tours that are like the Baton Death March, where you're like marching day after day after day after day. I even like to squeeze in several half days. And if somebody says, "Hey, I want it tailor made and I want it 2 weeks," I start to squeeze in just free day with nothing. And I say, "Hey, trust me, you're going to want that free day. You're going to want to sit in the piazza, to drink the wine, to people watch, because that's part of the fun of being in Italy." And
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
it's
but
a
I
balance.
think part of the difference though is, and you were alluding to this. Part of the difference is I come back home and I show people photos of the places that I went, and I go, man, look at this, look at how beautiful this is, and they go, what is it? And I go, well, it's called this, but I don't know anything
Mhm.
about it, and so it's the difference between that and being able to say, oh my gosh, it was built by this person and this happened there, and this there's so much rich history, and it's just so much more fulfilling. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and if you can meet people in the process, it gets even better. Like
Yes.
like I have a small interesting story, if you don't mind, about something I used to do, and
That's what I'm
and
here.
and I have been asked to literally unsheath my sword again. And so I have rounded up some of my friends, and we may be doing this soon. I thought I was retired from sword fighting. And I know everybody's going, sword fighting. What is he talking about? But we used to be part of a group called Normans of the Sun, where we reenacted Norman Sicily, or the kingdom of Norman Sicily. The Normans, they are the great transformation story. They came from the gray, cold north because they were not the first sons. They weren't going to inherit anything. They're the second, third, fourth, fifth sons. So they had to go make a living somewhere else. So they made it down to southern Italy, and they were enlisted and entrusted with the armies of the people called the Byzantines, which are the remnants of the Eastern Romans, and the Lombards, a Germanic tribe that had already been several centuries in Italy. And these guys were fighting it out, and both sides said, "Hey, Normans, come and join our army." So some joined this one, some joined the other one. And until one day, one Norman, who was a little bit smarter than the other Norman, said, "Why are we fighting each other?" And then the Normans look around and say, "Yeah, you're right." Because, and
That's a good
so
question.
but we're doing it in the name of the Lombards and the Byzantines. So they joined forces, and then they basically, to make a long story short as I can, they overthrew both the Byzantines and the Lombards, took all of southern Italy, and then eventually overthrew even the Arabs in Sicily. And they founded the kingdom of Sicily around 1130. And this was a glorious period, and because this kingdom would last in one form or another for 7 centuries. But they they had a Latin mind, but they would have Byzantine dress, and they ate a lot of Arab food. That's how cosmopolitan that they were. So we would do living history, reenactment of living history, which went all the way through to Frederick II. Remember our guy Frederick II of Castle del
Hmm.
Monte? They
Hmm.
went all the way through him because he was the grandson of the founder of the kingdom. And so we used to do all of these shows all around Italy, showing what it was like to be in the 1100s and early 1200s, because a lot of people love the 13 and 1400s because the the costumes are more, they have more jewels, they're more lavish, etc. But we wanted to show what it was really like in the middle ages. And so we brought a technique of live sword fighting across Italy, and we got to do this in places like the Palio of Oria in Puglia. We got to do the famous Calendamaggio festival in Assisi. That's one of the greatest medieval festivals in Italy. But we were also in San Gimignano in Tuscany. We were in Palermo, back down in Sicily. We were in Naples, Pozzuoli. We were in Ariano Irpino in the mountains of southern Italy, always bringing this period to life. But it wasn't just about sword fighting. We didn't hurt each other too bad, but it was also about showing what life was like. We would have workshops, etc., and we would conduct them in Italian, and the Italians loved this stuff. And so that to me was one of the great transformational stories because we were not just there as tourists. We were actually living inside of the history, living inside of 1,000-year-old tradition. And we got to march in the parades with the people in through all of the neighborhoods. And they used to have the palio, which means competitions between the neighborhoods. And it was absolutely amazing to be taken part of inside of 1,000-year tradition. And so some of my friends have heard that, I will be back full time in Italy very, very soon. So guess what they want? They say, Giuseppe, Joseph, can you, get the rust off your sword and come back out and do what you need to do. And that's to show living history. I don't know. I can't promise I'm going to do too much of that because I'm not 20 anymore. Unfortunately, I sure wish I was. But but I think, yeah, I think I'm gonna have to go back to doing that a little bit because it's absolutely fabulous. And at the end of a good workshop and a good sword fight and a good parade, guess what we do? We eat a
Yeah.
communal meal in
Uh-huh.
all of these places, usually with a table that's, 100 yards long with people from all around the town eating together as one people with one tradition that's usually 1,000 years old.
So cool. My question is, I assume that your sword is in the States, and how difficult is it to take that with you on a plane?
Well, that I still have to see because it was easier before all the security placements of the last of the last couple of decades. But I'm going to ask my daughter to see how I need to do this legally. My One of my daughters lives in Mantua, and she is Italian state police. And so, who better to ask? And because her colleagues and one of her best friends is actually in the frontier police. And so, I'm going to ask my daughter, how do I do this so that you don't have to come rescue me at the at the airport?
Yeah, and I'm sure that the answer is going to be don't bring it as a carry-on. That'll be the first part, I'm sure.
Absolutely, it will be. Don't do that. It's probably going to be. I'm imagining it's probably going to mean shipping it separately and having to fill out the appropriate customs documentation and having to wait for a month or two for it to get out of customs, because these swords are not sharp. They're purposely blunted because they're more theatrical swords. They're real, but they are theatrical blunted swords. They're not swords that are meant to be actually doing anybody any harm. And so but they have to check what it is and to make sure that it is what it is. But yeah, that's going to be some fun I can get into.
Very cool. I knew this was going to happen. Absolutely,
Mm.
that we're already over an hour into
Woo.
our episode here. I'm not in any rush, so but
Mhm.
definitely I want to give Italy its due. So I want please share with us some of your favorite crazy, funny, anything you have that you really would like to share with us of your adventures in Italy.
Well, I do have a couple of those, but one of my adventures was going down into Basilicata, which is a region in the very southern part of Italy. And I got to walk about 10 kilometers through a riverbed. And you say, why is that so fun? Well, because the mountains were around 3,000 feet on either side of us with cliffs and these rocks that were coming, spurting out of the mountains that looked like fingers. And we were basically tracing an area where after the Visigoths had sacked Rome, they went down south. So we were trying to find the riverbed of where this Visigothic king actually died. And so we got to go down there and we got to walk this. No, we didn't find any treasure, no gold, but we did find an interesting couple that was there, and they told us about their little town nearby, and that led us to go there and have a wonderful meal. We met new friends, and we went back 3 or 4 times again over the next few years. And so that is Italy at its simplest, at its best. It's almost crazy, but you make friends so easy in Italy, especially if you're doing kind of exotic things, and you're off the beaten path, you're always going to find a bit of an adventure.
Yeah, and isn't it amazing to, and again, something we've touched on before, but like just putting yourself out there and just opening up a conversation with someone, even if it's just a simple question, can turn into something so much greater. And having these lifelong memories, and even like you said, you've been back multiple times now,
Mhm.
but I think that I can't say it enough how important it is. Obviously, if you're introverted and you're uncomfortable and you just want to go and see, and to each their own. But I think if you really want to experience a place, even if it's not Italy, anywhere, just have a conversation because it can change everything.
It it really does. And remember that the Italians love conversation. They're so good at conversation. Sometimes they don't even need a lot of words to have the conversation. If you ever see Italians having a good conversation, you'll normally see they're gesticulating a whole lot. They have whole meanings of which are almost like hand signs. You can say this is good, this is bad, I'm hungry, that guy's clever, hey, watch out. You can do all of this with just hand signals. They can talk to each other from across the road without ever saying a word. They have whole conversations that way.
My gosh, it's their own version of sign language.
Yes, and I learned it. I learned, more than 50 of these signals, so
Gestures.
to
Yeah,
speak,
yeah.
these gestures, and but there's more. And then once you break them down regional, there is even more. But no, you can get into the depth of almost anywhere you go, and it will always amaze you. Like one of the places that I was not expecting to be amazed, but I absolutely was, is that, and I still ask people, "Hey, are you up for a little adventure? Because if you are, I want to send you to a place that's going to blow your mind." And some people say, "Yeah," and so I get them to go to a place called Otranto, which is the very southern part of the Puglia region. And there, I say, "Okay, have you heard of King Arthur?" And they go, "Yeah." And I say, "Well, you're going to meet King Arthur in Otranto." Then I explain it. I may set up a guide if that's what they want, or I just explain it in person, or if it's on one of our tours, they're already with us. But you go into the cathedral of Otranto, and there is this one of the most beautiful mosaics anywhere in the Mediterranean world. And it comes from the 1100s. And it was the brainchild by a monk called Pantaleone. And the first time I ever went in there, it was just people saying, "Oh, there's King Arthur in there." And I said, "Well, that's impossible because this is extreme southern Italy. That's a Celtic myth. This should not be there." And he was there. And that started whole conversations with locals about why it was there. And what I cobbled together, it was really an amazing story, was that the monk Pantaleone, he was from a nearby monastery called San Nicola di Cassole, which is, by the way, is only its ruins are there, but I'll get to that in a moment. And he wanted his fear in the 1100s was the loss of knowledge and the inability to teach some of the things that he knew, because a lot of people did not read and write, and he wanted to have some of the knowledge to be accessible to the people. And so he created this huge tree of life, but it had not only biblical symbols and scenes in there, which is very normal, but it also had the signs of the zodiac. It had geometrical symbols that were Scandinavian Viking as well as Islamic. And he had Alexander the Great in there. And then he also had King Arthur riding what we think is a goat, which is the symbol of riding into the other world, the Celtic afterlife. And so what I was able to learn from all of this was that he was passing on his knowledge of the world to all of the people of Otranto because they would all go to church. And he wanted to make sure that they all knew about different peoples and different arts and different styles, not only in his lifetime, but for the centuries that followed. And
How did he come across all of this knowledge? Again, this was hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and I don't know, it's mind blowing.
well, that is one of the great parts of the story. He was part of this monastery, San Nicola di Casoli, which was one of the greatest libraries in Europe at the time. And I know that some who are listening to this going, well, I've never heard about that library. If it was so great, why didn't I hear about it? I heard about the one in Alexandria that got burned, but what about this one? Well, this one was part of a Basilian tradition, meaning it was Eastern Orthodox, because it had been under the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, for many, many years. They carried forward from the old Roman times a little more knowledge than some of the West had, which had fallen under non-Roman folk, right? Who did not have the same legends and myths and religions and all this other stuff. So they were able to carry forth and to preserve some of the old philosophies, to preserve some of the old stories inside of their libraries. And in the 1400s, many people said this, in the 1400s, this is well after Pantaleone, but they said this was the greatest library in the West. But unfortunately, in 1480, it was destroyed by an Ottoman raid because there was conflict between East and West at that time, and they saw an opportunity in Otranto, in that area, and they went and they burned this wonderful library to the ground. And this was almost like a second Alexandria. Books that had the ancient philosophers in there, the mathematicians, it was all there and it was all burned. It was a great loss for humanity. But what did remain, they did not destroy the cathedral floor. And we learned about the important centuries later, about Pantaleone, about this monastery, about its library from that floor, because it gave us a glimpse of the knowledge that came out of that monastery. And then it was discovered in Rome and in the Vatican archives and in Paris. There had been a lot of scholastic scrolls and pages that were actually on loan. And so they were actually able to trace them back to San Nicola di Casoli and Otranto and all the way back to the period of Pantaleone. And you get all of this from just looking for a curious reason for King Arthur on a cathedral floor in southeastern Puglia.
I don't even know what to say. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
As long as we finish up with wine, a good wine every day, then, the legends just keep rolling.
That's wow. Really awesome. I mean, at some point we should head toward the final 5 questions that I have for you, but I'm not quite ready
Sure.
yet. I think if you have a couple more, I'm having so much fun. So you can keep on rolling if you have a couple of more stories or experiences you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, I can share one about one. Well, for me anyway, it was quite meaningful. But I really liked going up into the hinterland. It's from Naples. It's about an hour and a half up into the mountains, where there's this town, Sant'Agata de Goti. And this isn't just any town, because we've spoken about the greats, the Greeks, the Romans, etc., but we rarely speak about the Samnites and the Goths and all of these other peoples. And so I went up there on a venture because I wanted to know a little bit more about the Samnites, but I also know that after the Goths overthrew the Roman Empire, a lot of them just ended up there. in this Samnitic town. The Samnites were an ancient Italic people, but the Goths, they were an invading Germanic horde, if you will, and they overthrew in the 5th century the Roman Empire, or at least partially overthrew it. And they ended up in this town. So I said, I want to know more. And why not? I'm in Italy, right? So I'm going to go learn. And I went up there, and yes, I saw some Roman artifacts. I even saw some artifacts that were Romanized. They were Gothic, so they were kind of a hybrid between this, between the Romans and the Goths. But that's not what got me, though. What got me is that I had some of the best wine that I have ever had in my life in the cantinas of Sant'Agata dei Goti. And and then I discovered that the wines up there, especially the Ienico that's in that region and that entire region, it actually came from the Greeks 2,700 years ago. They planted those grapes around there. And in implanting and creating this wonderful wine, it hasn't been tampered with much at all. And so it is possible to drink a wine that the Greeks drank, the Samnites enjoyed, the Romans themselves enjoyed. You can still enjoy that same wine to this very day. And this is just what I call a hybrid story. It's just like an anecdote, but there are so many of these stories where you just stumble upon something that is joyful, if you will. And so whenever I am in Italy now, I always look for these places that have wonderful wines, but that may be a little bit off the beaten path. So again, the name of that place is Sant'Agata dei Goti. It's Saint Agatha of the Goths.
Wow. Really awesome. There's a question that I didn't ask you that I ask every
Hmm.
guest near the beginning,
Hmm.
and I don't know why. I guess I was just very excited to get into hearing, your experiences. But how did travel become a thing in your life? Were you traveling from a young age, or was it more when you actually? I think we may have talked about this, but for the listeners, was the military really what kicked that off for you?
Yeah, well, that was almost like an origin story that it kicked it off and it sent me some. I didn't just go to Florida, for example, that the military sent me a long ways away. And so that got me thinking that that there's a lot more to explore in this world. But what really got me into travel is after getting some advanced degrees, some graduate degrees, and even getting a certificate, a postmaster's, a specialization there in Italy in ancient Italian history. But it got me thinking, okay, what am I going to do with all of this history? And so I have taught like Western Civ and a couple of classes like that, but that to me was not joyful. It was a little bit mundane. And when I started to take people to the Sunken City or to the second or the third largest Roman amphitheater that was ever built, or to the castle of Baia that sits on top of Julius Caesar's villa. I could teach people things that in a classroom setting, they may not be receptive to. I can teach them right there live about what they're looking at and why it's important, why it was important for their time, and why it's still important for us today. And that is part, I think, of that transformational magic that we're talking about. And so that's why I got into travel. I didn't do it because I wanted to travel. I did it because every adventure is transformational for me, and I think it's the same for most of our guests.
Yeah. No, I would tend to agree, and it's exactly it's similar to the reason why I started a podcast. I didn't start a podcast just because I wanted people to hear me talk. I enjoy so much hearing people's stories about their travels, and I just kind of have like sort of the same thing. I feel like if I enjoy it this much and they enjoy hearing mine, there's chances that maybe somebody else out there might like to hear them as well. So I get that.
Yes.
I get
And
that totally.
and I really appreciate you giving this forum and me, a chance to talk about some of my experiences because I usually don't get to talk, too much about these experiences, but maybe they've had some value for some people along the way. And so I really appreciate you giving me the chance to be able to do this.
It's my pleasure. Absolutely. Well, let's do this. Let's do the final five questions,
Mhm.
and there's no time limit on these. So you feel free to expand as much as you'd like or as little as you'd like, but on any of your answers, and maybe some stories come out of this as well. So question number one, and you don't know these, right, Joseph? Or have you
No,
listened till the end of some of my episodes?
I don't know these questions.
Okay, excellent. That's how I like it.
Mhm.
All right. So question number one, and we've touched on food, but not really specifically. We've talked about some of the cool meals that you've had. But question number one is, of all the places in the world that you have ever been, and maybe you did already answer this question, but maybe you can ask something different. What are your one or two favorite meal experiences that you've ever had? So not necessarily the food itself, or maybe it is the food itself. What are one or two of those experiences you've had? And I know you have touched on a couple.
Yeah, I'll give you another one that's a little bit different. I'll give you 2. I'll give you, the man of the streets and then the stumbling man. The man of the streets is that that pizza was invented in Naples. When I say pizza, I mean the modern pizza.
Mhm.
There's people say, "Yeah, but there's been pizza," the Greeks had pizza, the Egyptians had pizzas, the Roman had pizzas, but what they had was essentially flatbread with stuff on top, right? But in the 1700s, Naples had a large teeming population that did not have a lot of money and they needed to be fed. So they invented what is the modern pizza, which is a certain type of bread that's just with using a certain type of flour, olive oil, some cheese, and here is a magical ingredient, and it's not the basil, okay? It is the tomato. In the 1700s, most of Europe thought that the tomato was poisonous. They didn't want to eat it. They didn't want to touch it in most of Europe. That's crazy, right? And so in Naples, they experimented and they said, well, not only is this not poison, this is really good if it's made in a certain way. So they figured out how to make a pizza in a wood powered stove, if you will. It has to be around 800, 850 Fahrenheit. It's got to cook from 60 to 90 seconds. And you can have a meal that is, pretty nutritious, very quick, very economic. And you can stand there, you can eat it, and you can go. The old pizzas, many of them were not served on a plate, Bill. They were folded up and they were eaten by hand right there at the moment. So one of my best meals has been in the center of Naples, across from the Church of the Purgatory, and this place is actually called Pizzeria Purgatorio, and they make one of the most divine pizzas, not only in Naples, but in all of the world. And it is not that expensive. You're going to be eating around a whole lot of people. You're going to have that little bit of chaos that is Naples, but you're going to eat something that's a slice of heaven that has 3 centuries of stories behind it. So that's one story. The other one, I call it the stumbling man a little bit. I was going from Catania to Palermo in Sicily. And you have to cross through the center of Sicily and go by this town that's thousands of feet up in the air on the top of a mountain called Enna, which is the very center of the Sicilian world. And I went up there because they had this wonderful Greek temple. They had this wonderful Norman castle. So that's all I need, right? Is Greeks and then the Romans. I just need Greeks, Romans, Normans, and you had me. So after I do all of my history stuff, as we'll call it, we were hungry. We had no meal plans, but I saw this place and I said, well, we don't need anything fancy. Let's just grab something that's good, that's local, that's economic, because we do still have about an hour and 20 minutes or so to get to Palermo. And we went in this place and it was called the Mito di Core. Core is Greek for girl, but it's referring to Penelope. Penelope was the one who Hades dragged underneath the ground, right? And she had to stay there for 6 months, and then she could come back up to the sunlit world for 6 months. If you know your Greek mythology, you'll know what I'm talking about. So I'm already in. Just the name is awesome, right? And so I said, what meal should I have? And the guy said, can I just serve you? And I said, yeah, but just make sure that it's local. And he goes, yeah, don't worry about it. And so they came and they had this big smorgasbord called the Board of Myth. And it had all these different types of salamis and breads and olives and cheeses, including the famous ricotta cheese that Sicilian is known for. It's like a saffron ricotta that's well salted that the Greeks brought in 2,800 years ago. So all of this is going on, and I'm saying, how am I going to eat all this? I can't eat all this, and everybody else is full too. But lo and behold, to our chagrin, comes the pastas. Three different types of pasta: wild boar ragu. The other one was a cacio and pepe, which is a Roman dish, but it was made with guanciale, which is like pork bits. And you just go from one thing to another there. And so then, of course, we had wonderful desserts, and desserts are wonderful in Sicily. Their cakes, their ice creams. They use a lot of nuts there as well. But a lot of people don't know is that the Arabs were the ones who brought in sugarcane, citrus, even the famous eggplants that a lot of people like to eat in Sicily, and then all of the almonds. So a lot of the stuff that we say is Sicilian or even Italian was brought in by the Arabs when they conquered Sicily in the 8 to 900s. So I'm enjoying this huge mill up in Enna, looking down thousands of feet on either side. And then when the bill came, it was maybe $20 per person to have one of the most transformational meals I have ever had in my life. And it was one of the best. And I didn't even tell you about the wine, the Nero Diavola, which is a which is a local Sicilian wine. It was one of the best. So yes, I'm still raving about that experience to this day.
Oh my gosh. This just sounds incredible. Okay. I almost don't want to move on to question two. I almost want to hear more about food with you. But
Food is good.
okay. So question number two, this one you may not actually have an answer for, and that's okay
Hmm.
if you don't. So question number two surprises some people. It
Hmm.
is, of all the places in the world that you have ever been, even if I came to you and said, Joseph, here's a free trip, go and have fun and whatever, you would say, no, thank you. I don't want to go back.
Yes. Okay. I feel like whatever I say, I may, not be fair to somebody for some reason that I may not even know that I'm being unfair about. But believe it or not, it's places like Orlando for me. These,
Mhm.
and I really hate saying that because I take my son, who loves Universal, by the way, and we'll be going there again very soon. So I I do have to go because I am a father, but I don't necessarily enjoy these fake worlds. I enjoy genuine experiences, traveling with purpose, authenticity, learning stuff. But if I try and look on the positive side, if my son is happy and he's having the time of his life, then I'm happy too. But that doesn't
Yes.
make me want to go there.
Right. And I actually don't think that's the first time that Orlando has been the answer. So don't feel bad. Feel
Okay.
bad for Orlandians or whatever, but
Yeah.
yeah, some people choose to live there. So,
Not me.
all right. So question number three is a little more happy, and it's flipping that 180 degrees. But I do add a caveat. So question number three is, of all the places in the world that you have been, and I guess I would say if you're discussing Italy, maybe a region, of all the places in the world you have been, if you only have one or two trips left in your lifetime, what are those one or two places that you absolutely have to go back to?
Well, it would be Italy, of course, but it would be a place that we haven't talked much about, and I could talk for hours about it. So I'll give you the 1 minute version. And it would be a place called Gaeta. And it's about halfway up between Rome and Naples, halfway up from Naples heading towards Rome. And Gaeta was where I was sent as a teenager with the military. I landed in Naples and they bussed me up to Gaeta and they said, meet your ship. The ship wasn't there. So I got to hang out for 3 or 4 days waiting for the ship. And how fun is that, right? But what I love about Gaeta, it is a small seaside town. It's one of the most beautiful borgos or villages in Italy, but it has hills, nearby mountains. It has a beautiful gulf. And then Old Gaeta itself has 3,000 years of history because there was an Oscan people called the Arunci that were there and they put in these cyclopean walls, and then the Romans came much later, but that area is all associated with Greek and Mycenaean myths. So you've got the whole myths, you've got the history, and a lot of people don't know this, but the first time that pizza, because the food is very good in Gaeta, the first time that pizza was ever mentioned in a document was in 997 in Gaeta. And so if you can imagine, at least for me, that perfect place between not too hot, not too cold, mountains, sea, great food, small vibe, but I can get on a train and be in Rome in an hour or Naples in an hour, that would be Gaeta. And that for me is my perfect place. That's my happy place. That's the one that at least once or twice a week I'm looking at what are those webcams, live webcams to see what's going on in Gaeta, just because I love that place so much. And if you said that's going to be the last trip of your life, and I'll say I want to go to Gaeta and I don't want to leave it.
So cool. I definitely have plans to make it back to Italy. I'm gonna try to remember that place, and I'm gonna try to write it down and check it out. And I won't obviously have the same experience that you did. It was so meaningful for you, but in a
Mm-hmm.
special way. But it just sounds wonderful. So
It is. Go
happy to
enjoy it.
pick it up. Okay, moving on to four. Question
Mm-hmm.
four is: of all the places in the world that you have never been, but same caveat, one or two trips left in your lifetime for whatever reason, what are those one or two places that you still absolutely have to get to?
Antarctic. I have to go to the Antarctic, not only to complete my last continent, but it's also because I still want to see it before, it keeps floating away, but I still want to see it in its pristine glory. I want to see what it's like on Antarctic.
Mhm.
And I know that there's not a lot to see there except the penguins, but that's a place that's always been fascinating for me. And and so I've been thinking about going because you can take ships from New Zealand and you can go all the way down there. And so I've been thinking about doing that.
Yeah. It's never really been on my list, but the people that I have talked to on this show that have been there,
Mm-hmm.
they just say it's just so indescribable, the beauty and just the breathtaking, the awe of being there. That I've actually talked to people who've been there multiple times because it's just that incredible. So
Yes, I want to go. Yes, that's what I want to experience.
I don't blame you. So, question number five, the final question.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy because you know what your answer is. What do you have coming up in travels for the rest of this year? I know you're going back to Italy, but the rest of this year, maybe into next year, what kind of travels do you already have planned? Where are you going?
Well, you know that I have to go to Italy, and that's just, but I'm also going to Greece because I have just created a new tour of the Odyssey, which is the places of Italy that were associated with the Odyssey, but also kind of the origin story on the Greece side, which is Kefalonia and Ithaca. So I'm going over there too, and that's going to be another one of the programs we're offering. I will go to Brazil in the next several months, and I have to go to England and Wales and Cornwall because I've put together a program. I know it's a little nerdy. I do apologize, but I've put together a nice program for King Arthur, and so I'm going to be going up there for that. So that's kind of my world for the next several months.
Really fantastic. Really jealous of you. Really, really fantastic. All these places that you're going. This has been absolutely incredible, as I knew it was going to be, Joseph. I know
Hmm.
you had something to add about what those items are that our listeners, if they've made it this far,
Yeah.
can take advantage of. And then I invite you to just wrap up with anything you'd like to say to wrap the episode.
I thank you so much for having me, and I wanted to give because you give a lot of great stories to your listeners. So I wanted to give something back too. So what I wanted to give, if you go to italianhistorywithjoseph.com/stories, you will go there and you'll have access to a few things. One, you'll have access to some of my field notes. That's 7 places in Italy that you can't visit unless you have the key or the person who introduces you. And so that's gold right there. There's no amount of money that can do that because that's 35 years of relationships. Also, we're going to give you a chapter that did not make it in my new book called Buried Italy. And that's again talking about tourism off the beaten path and how it's changed over the years. And you have to, get out there now and explore that Italy before it's gone. And but there's one chapter that didn't make it into the book, and that you will be able to read. And it's a lot of fun, and it is on Narni. And if you heard Narnia when I said Narni, you heard almost correctly because Narnia was based upon Narni. But that's all I can tell you because you have to read it. But also there, you're also going to be able to have access, pre-access for any new tour that comes out as soon as you sign up there. You're going to have 72 hours before or knowledge before the tours actually come out publicly to be able to think if you want to do one of these tours as well. And because we normally just do 8 to 10 people, and a lot of them, they fill up pretty quick. So that is a bit of gold. And you'll also have a fourth thing, which I won't tell you. It'll be a surprise, but you'll have access to be able to do something that I don't always give everybody. And finally, on that same page, you'll also have access to our social media: Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Italian History with Joseph, and the ability to contact us in case you want a tailor-made program for yourself or you just want to chit-chat. And then we can do that too. And so that's what you get at ItalianHistoryWithJoseph.com/stories.
That's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for doing that for us. That means a lot. So
It's my pleasure. My pleasure.
thank you so much for being. And again, any last words to the listeners? Anything you'd like to just say before we hit stop?
I would say if you've been to Italy, you've got to go back. And if you have not been to Italy, you have to go. It will be transformational in your life.
I will second that wholeheartedly. Absolutely. Thank you again, Joseph, for taking all of this time with us. I appreciate you more than you know. And good luck on all your travels going forward.
Thank you, Bill, for having me.
And there's another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast in the books. Thank you so much for listening today. There was another great guest with some great stories, as always. And I hope that you will support all of the guests by checking out the show notes and going to their web pages, seeing any socials and projects that they may have going on. And please, again, I'll ask as always to like, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really does help to allow the podcast to grow and reach more people, and I appreciate you for doing that. Also, if you haven't done so, check out the website, whyvpodcast.com, where you can find blog posts. If you'd like to be a guest, please register to be a guest on the site, and check out the merch page. There's some really cool stuff if you're interested in representing the pod, along with some other cool travel items and apparel that I'm working on every day as well. Join me again next week for another great guest with more incredible stories. New episodes drop every Sunday just after midnight Eastern Time. Until then, thank you for being here, and have a great day.